confirmadme por favor que se me escucha.
Please, if you could confirm that you can hear me. Yes, we can.
Pues buenas tardes
Perfect.
a todos.
Right. Good afternoon,
Soy Borja
everybody.
López Crespo.
My name is Borja López
Y
Crespo.
Esta hora de esta tarde me gustaría hablar con vosotros
And
sobre cómo
for
fomentar una
this
buena
hour
sexualidad
session,
en
I would
adolescentes,
like to speak to you about how to promote healthy sexuality in adolescents, taking a look at some keys that can help us.
Entonces, me gustaría empezar con esta cita de la
I would
OMS.
like to start with this quote from the World Health Organization, saying that knowledge protects and ignorance exposes. So I would like you to reflect on this quote
Que fundamenta el fin de la charla.
because it is fundamental for the purpose of this session.
Antes de nada, me gustaría deciros un poco quién soy yo.
Before starting, I would like to tell you who am I.
Os comento, mi nombre es Borja López Crespo.
My name is Borja López Crespo, as I said. I am doing my PhD in the University of Alcalá in Health Sciences.
Tengo un par de másters.
I hold a master's degree in general health psychology, in clinical intervention, and in dialectical behavior therapy, and I'm also specialized in grief and trauma. I'm accredited by the European Psychotherapy Association as the European as a psychotherapist. I'm a member of the team at Dr. Carlos Chiclana's clinic. I'm health of outreach at the clinic. I'm coordinator of the podcast Mental Health for Everyone. I also work as school counselor at El Prado School, and I am a psychologist and psychotherapist, and I'm not alone. This is a large team in the Carlos Chiclana clinic. Here, well, some of you probably already know them because I am aware that they have been giving some courses, some talks. Well, now coming into our topic today, I would like you to think why it's important to speak about sexuality, because there were some prior sessions. I would like to know what kind of learnings you got from them. And I think it's important to ask ourselves this question. William Masters, he was a sexologist, and he said how important it is to study sexuality. And he said the study of sex is the study of the origins of life, and science holds the key. For a long time, we have been hiding in the dark, we have been living in the dark, and we need to tackle this without shame, without guilt, and see what is sex without taboos, because what we can see most of the cases is that even if we speak about sex, people tend to lack some knowledge about it. So answering the previous question, why is it important to speak about sexuality? It is important that people can be educated before others educate them. You need to educate yourself before others do. Fostering sexuality or sexual education in adolescents in such a way that Google is not the trainer. Google is not educating them, because now in our current society we face many risks such as pornography, misinformation, then shame, social pressure, not being accepted by others. So my goal here with this session that we are sharing today is to demystify sex education, sexual education, so that we have a clearer understand what it means to live a healthy sexuality, and provide tools to support your adolescents. You can see here, when we ask teenagers, adolescents, if they have been talked to about sexuality, almost half of them, 48.9%, say yes, while more than 50%, 51%, say no. So in the end of the day, there's still a taboo there, there's still fear, and it continues to be something that generates some kind of shame. And it's important that we get educated so that we can train them, we can educate them and give them proper tools.
Por seguir centrándonos, ¿no? De lo más
To give some framework, we will start with more general concepts to then move on to more specific concepts. I would like to settle down three important concepts: sex, sexuality, and sexual health. Sex is the biological characteristics that define individuals as male or female. It's also true that there are some genetic anomalies, and there are people that have different chromosomes. This is something we will see later on, but it's usually what defines you as man or woman. On the other hand, we have sexuality, which is a central aspect of the human being, present throughout our lives, since we are born until we die. And it is the way people express and experience the instincts and the feelings that shape their relations with others. And finally, we have sexual health. This would be, if you know what health is, then sexual health would be physical, mental, and social well-being in everything related to sexuality. So it's important that these concepts are differentiated, are clear. So what is sexuality? It is a fundamental dimension in the human being. It is much more than sex or sexual relationships, because it covers many different aspects, as you can see. It is biological aspects, it covers emotional, psychological, social, cultural, physical aspects, pleasure, identity, desire, emotional bonding, or reproduction. Sexuality is expressed through thoughts, fantasies, desires, beliefs, attitudes, values, behaviors, practices, roles, and relationships. And it is not something fixed or identical in every people, in every person. Rather, it changes throughout life, and it is influenced by different personal and contextual factors. I'm not sure if you know who is this little boy in the picture we can see on the screen. It is King Arthur from the Disney film. And I'm asking this because I would like you to bear in mind this figure of King Arthur. When he grows older and he gets knights, he was ruling, but he got surrounded by very valuable people, the knights, who were assessing him. And I thought there would be one in charge of defense of Camelot. I am imagining another knight in charge of economy, another one thinking about supplies, another one for health. That is, they were like ministers now. They were counseling him, they were assessing him, and then he was the one to decide. So with sexuality, there is something similar here. We have a round table that facilitates dialogue. If you, teachers will understand this perfectly well, if you place a table where people look at the board, at the blackboard, or you try with this setup of the tables for them not to distract because all of them will have their attention focused, facilitate the communication amongst the parties. So as King Arthur will also be composed of different aspects in the human being, and it is important that all of them can speak to each other. So we find in different dimensions of sexuality We have a physical dimension that has to do with pleasure, desire, impulses. It is the most animal part of human beings. Then we have the emotional dimension. This has to do with emotions, with the bonding, with affection, with the willingness to approach another person, to have a nice detail with another person. There's another dimension, which is the cognitive one, which is the intellectual part that helps us make decisions. It is about learning, about getting information. It is the part that gets trained, gets educated to then make the proper choices.
Otra dimensión de la sexualidad y del ser humano sería la cultural.
Now we have another dimension, which is cultural. This has to do with the rules of the society we live in, the values. And finally, we will have an ethical or spiritual dimension that helps us make decisions. This has to do with our personal values, and it helps us to make good decisions and differentiate right and wrong. As I said before, all these dimensions need to be in constant communication, and sexuality will be good and positive if each party can have its own voice, if each of these dimensions contributes with its own part, with its information to the whole. Once these dimensions of sexuality are clear to us, now it's interesting for us to take a look at the levels of sexuality. These levels are three. First, sexualization, which will be at the lower part of the ladder, biological development. On the other hand, we will have the second, which is gender. Once the biological part is developed, then the psychological part will be developed, the perception that you have on yourself. And third, in the higher part of the ladder, we will have erotic, which is the experiences that this person has had about their own sexuality. Now, starting with this first level, the sexualization, it is a biological process defining the sexuality of a person, and that will encompass physical and genetical aspects of the person. We were speaking about sex, sexuality, and sexual health. This is sex, either man or woman, and therefore how an individual can become a sexual being. This will take place in smaller steps of the ladder. A person will be developed first with chromosomal sex, defined at the moment of fertilization, when the egg and the sperm contribute the sex chromosomes. You know that every person has genes with genetic load, and the sex chromosomes have half of the chromosomic material, and when they get together, that of the man and the woman, they will have the same material. So we will have these sex chromosomes XX for females or XY for males. This is in most of the cases. As I said before, there are some syndromes where there is a genetic alteration, modification, and there may be XXY or XX0, and there may be other difficulties. On the second step, we will have the gonadal sex. Once we have defined the chromosome sex, we will have the gonads developed, that is, ovaries or testes, and they will start to develop around the 6th week of gestation. After that, we will have the genital differentiation. The hormones continue the process of sex differentiation. The ovaries, in the case of women, will produce estrogen and progesterone, which are non-determinant factors, since with or without them, with or without ovaries, female fetal differentiation will occur spontaneously, as long as no male hormones interfere. This is a mechanism of protection by nature. If you say woman, woman. If you say man, man. If you do not say anything, there will be life. And unless there is something differentiating with these determining factors, saying clearly, no, this is going to be a man, a male, then it will be developed as a woman. So in the case of the testes, we will have the key factors for fetal masculinization, testosterone and the Mullerian inhibiting factor. This inhibiting factor prevents feminization. So we start with this at very early stages, and this will be developed as a male with testes. And we will move on to the next step in the ladder. Once the biological side has been developed, we will move on to the psychological process, which is a continuous process. It happens all the life, since birth until the person dies. And it will encompass sexual identity, gender role, and sexual orientation. These are three different concepts. The normal sexual development entails compatibility of all the previous ones. As you can see on the screen, the part that is more related with sex and sexuality, which will be genetic, gonadal, and genetical sex, and with gender, which is the psychological sex, your construction about it. Psychological gender, at the same time, will have three different concepts. Sexual identity or gender identity, which will be the self-identification, how you perceive yourself. It is the internal feeling about yourself and what you develop about yourself and your sexuality. Apart from this, we have the gender role, which will not be self-identification, but the external identification. This is behaviors, norms, and expectations that a culture or society assigns to individuals based on their sex or gender. And finally, we have the orientation of desire. This would be the pattern of emotional and or sexual attraction. And finally, we will move on to the third step in the ladder, which would be erotic. This has to do with how all of the above is expressed. This would be like a Russian doll, you know, the Matryoshkas, where you are going to upper layers, and it contains the previous one. So it refers to how all of the above is expressed, how people live as sexual beings, and it depends on their values, beliefs, on their way of understanding relationships and feelings, emotions, etc. I do not want to come into details with this part here because I think Camila Donoso, my colleague, already spoke about sexuality during childhood, but I just wanted to give you some highlights. In the Western world, for a long time, sexuality has been a taboo. And it was Freud, who was a psychoanalyst, who dared to speak about the different stages of psychosexual development. And this has come until our present days. Freud identified different stages where the children explore the body, explore pleasure on a natural way and on a gradual way. They discover themselves. First, we will have the pleasure of the mouth, which will take place in the first year of life. If you have a baby in mind, they are exploring with their mouth. They lick, they suck, they bit, taking objects or mom, dad. I was with a friend who had his baby, and the first thing he did was licking his shoulder. It is something they do. They explore with their mouth in this first year of life. After this first year, until the third, the focus moves to sphincter control. We're not coming into details here, but it has been seen that when there are problems here in psychological relations, this has to do with this phase. And it's usually children that are controllers, are Freud said that it was associated to sphincter control. From 3 to 6 years old, it is the phallic stage. It is related to the pleasure directed towards the genitals. Here we have the Oedipus complex or Electra complex. If you don't know what it is, when children fall in love, boys fall in love with their moms, and they even feel jealous about their parents. And the Electra complex, I will always remember a friend of mine who every weekend was organizing a false wedding with her dad, and no, mommy, you are not invited. They were going through the corridor of their house. Well, this is what is called Electra complex. This is something that is common between 3 and 6. Then we move on to latentia phase from 6 to 12, where we can see that this sexual energy is dormant because the child is focused on learning, on playing, on socializing, making new friends. And from 12 onwards, desire returns strongly, directed now towards other people, not so much self-exploration, but in the relation with others. Now we come into sexuality in adolescence. When they are 13, 15 years old, there will be a huge increase in sex hormone levels, which leads to intense physical and psychological changes. In this stage, the body becomes central. Here there's a rapid growth in weight and height, and there will be a development of secondary sexual characteristics. We could see the primary before with the sexualization process, and now there will be a second development of these secondary characteristics. Apart from this, no sé qué era esto, perdón. I'm sorry, I didn't know which one was this. But moving on, you will see that there is a development which is different between men and women. In the case of male, there's more muscle mass, more physical strength, increase in height. They may have facial and body hair growth, such as arms, legs, chest, abdomen, underarms, the pubic area. They will have a wider chest and shoulders, changes in the voice tone, the penis lengthens and thickens. There's a possible onset of hair loss, even if it's very gradual. And in the case of women, we have the menstruation, the breast development, and nipple development. Less overall growth compared to males, although a higher level of fat, especially face, buttocks, and thighs. Wider hips. There's body hair development to a lesser extent, and also voice becomes a bit deeper. So in this stage, 13, 15 years old, I highlight this green part here at the bottom. The sexual behaviors that start to appear respond to this biological awakening and may lead to social acceptance or rejection. So this ends up being, for adolescents, for those of you who are teachers, you know that this becomes something major to feel they are desired by others. It is so important for them, not so much by parents, but their peers. to feel attractive for others, and so on. Now we will move on to 16 years old. Here there's a slowdown of this growth. There will be a hormonal balance, and in the body image, in the psychological construction of the adolescents, we have the inclusion of the second sexual characteristics. For example, facial hair, they feel insecure, they do not feel comfortable with that, and when they are 16, they believe they are adults, and they already have their beard. So it is very common in this stage to see masturbation. This is something that is a bit shocking sometimes, and it's a taboo that we speak about, but we need to know that this is very common, that the adolescents, more boys than girls, do this. And also couples are very common. They become more enduring and more emotionally bonded. So the first relationships they have, the first couples, the first boyfriends, girlfriends are, adolescents. Sometimes it's just to prove for the others that they really have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, but then there will be development towards a higher commitment with the other person. In all cultures, adolescents tend to experiment early and compete. If we analyze, we can observe this, we will see this. They compete to find the best partner according to their culture's standards. This competition may explain why some of these young people with fewer sexual partners are more likely to experience depression. So just for you to see how important it is to feel accepted, it is sometimes not because I like this girl. It's just because she is the prettiest. There's a consensus in the classroom that she's the prettiest. The development of sexual identity, which begins in childhood and which emerges in adolescence, is a natural process for those of us who are heterosexual, but can be very stressful for homosexual individuals, because it is at this point in adolescence when they realize and they become aware of that difference. So there's a risk of stigmatization and marginalization, and this leads to a higher risk of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, drug abuse, and sometimes even suicide. So it is not a joke. It is very important to watch this, to help these people. I have included here, just for you to know, what are the main fears and insecurities that we can see in adolescents about their sexuality. There may be more, but just to give you some highlights. The first is fear of rejection. As in sexuality and with many other topics, they feel panic to be rejected, to not be desired. They are worried about not being sexually attractive or desirable. They will also feel insecure about not having reciprocated feelings. If they like a person, this person may not like them. Then we will have fear of not living up to expectations. Fear of not knowing during the first experiences, worrying about not living up to expectations, and this is sometimes influenced by pornography or stories fantasies that their peers can tell, and they end up generating a lot of pressure. Then there's another fear, in the case there are sexual relations, unwanted pregnancies, and sexually transmitted infections or diseases, STIs. Sometimes in adolescents, even if they feel fear about it, the hormone revolution, lack of knowledge, leads them to coexist with risky behaviors. Finally, shame or discomfort when talking about sex. Difficulties expressing their doubts, their desires, or to speak about boundaries. It is a topic that is usually about it. There's lack of knowledge. They want to show that they know a lot, that they are informed, and in the end, if we are asked about sexuality, it is very intimate. So it is not very easy to speak about it. Also, fear of being judged by friends, by either a couple or by adults. There may also be a confusion about sexual and gender identity. Not because there may be homosexuality, just because they are discovering themselves. I had a boy at a clinic, and it was very funny. He said, I am not sure if I like a friend of mine, a boy, or that in reality, since I have very few friends, boys and girls, I had problems at home. Maybe since I feel loved, and I understand that I can like that. So they start to develop their ideas, their construction that we spoke about before. So there may be insecurity regarding sexual orientation or gender identity. And there may also be a fear of family, school, or peers' rejection. We also have social pressure, the fear of not fitting in. It's a fear to lose virginity, and there's also a tendency, a trend for labels. For example, in the case of males, they are attacked as immature, or labeled as immature or lack of experience, or women, they are attacked by you're promiscuous, or you have too much experience. And we also have another aspect, which is moral aspects. We may have a moral religious conflict, dilemma between desire and the feelings you may have for certain practices. Okay, having said that, it is important that we know what is to educate in sexuality, on sexuality. Educating on sexuality is mainly teaching adolescents to bond with others, to establish relations with others, to speak about affection, not only genitals, but to speak about love, affection, feelings, respect. Educating on sexuality will also be promoting critical thinking, making decisions. When you want to speak about these topics, it's important to take care about the language, to mind the language, and to use silences, because this will allow the other to digest, to process, to feel understood, and to project, to understand. It's about accompanying. We need to accompany them and taking into account that they are adolescents and they may make mistakes. We also need to adapt to different speeds, because as parents, educating children is different to teachers to accompany 30 children at the same time, where they suddenly, you will see so small children with the voice that has not changed, and they just want to play, and some others much more developed with sexual characteristics developed. So we need to adapt to different speeds. We should not either slow down the process of those who are more advanced, because we need to educate them and avoid Google educating them, or we cannot deprive the innocence of those who are not developed yet. So we have to tend to all of them, not to focus on a stereotype, to care for everyone. We need to take a look at every specific case and adjust. It's important to provide references. Healthy, what is healthy, what is not, what are the risks, and allow them to make mistakes and to help clear doubts. And this should all take place in an environment that is facilitating of a positive education. Here you have some keys to accompany. How can we accompany them? How can we do this? Well, first of all, creating spaces of trust, creating safe spaces without invading. We need to be present without pressure. We need to generate a respectful environment. It's important that we speak clearly, and they are not going to feel it's a scandal. We should not use euphemisms. In fact, they will turn into adult mode when you use clear words. We need to normalize their experience without trivializing, and validate without sensationalizing. We cannot say everything is perfect or everything is wrong. We have to find the middle ground. We will also need to answer difficult questions that we find really difficult. So it's important not to improvise moral judgments, and we have to validate their concern. Or sometimes we just have to say, I don't know. But it's about speaking from our own position, from what we can contribute with our own experience. But of course, we do not know everything about everything. We should not impose. We just have to help them reflect and think. What to say when you don't know what to say? Well, first you have to acknowledge with humility. If necessary, if we think there's something complicated going on and we don't know what to do, we should refer to the most knowledgeable person with good criteria. And the idea is to be a guide, not an oracle. We have to give advice. Here you will see on the yellow part some phrases I recommend you to avoid, and on the right side, some sentences that may help adolescents. If we have adolescence, it's a difficult stage because hormones drive them crazy. I think it's much better to understand that adolescence is a stage of many physical, emotional, and social changes, and supporting them with information and understanding is key. If we hear girls have to be more careful, I think it's important to say that responsibility for sexual health is shared. It's important that all adolescents learn to take care of themselves and others. In case of that is not appropriate for, or it's better to have abstinence, it is better to speak about all options, and this will allow the adolescents to make informed decisions and free decisions. That's for boys or that's for girls. or that's not appropriate for your age. In that case, I understand your curiosity. We can talk about this in a way that is appropriate for their age, maturity, and so on. And in the case of that's for boys, that's for girls, we need to understand that each person can express their sexuality, emotions, and interest in a unique and valid way. So it's better to say, tell me how you are living this. Or this sensitivity is for girls. Well, boys also need to express their interests, or they may need to say how beautiful they think a girl is. If you do that, don't complain later. Well, instead of that, why don't we say, we want you to make informed decisions and to know that you always have the right to ask for help. They can always find a support in us. It shouldn't be a punishment, like this is wrong, but instead it's better to say, I'm here to help you. Porn is the reality of sex. Well, thank goodness this is changing. The perception is changing, but there are still many adolescents thinking that watching porn, they will learn about sexuality. And the reality is that porn doesn't show real or affectionate relationships. And talking about healthy sexuality includes respect, consent, and communication, which we will not find in porn. I will finally say, don't talk about that with your students. They will take advantage of you. They will not respect you. Instead of that, I think it's the contrary. We have to talk with students about sexuality from an educational and professional role. And this will, of course, this can be a controversial topic and they may make jokes, but this will give them security and promote a healthy development. This slide is for me very interesting because it shows how the current society is. And we are now in a hypersexualized society. We could see that there are sexual dysfunctions more than ever. 84% of young adolescents, which is the most fertile stage in life, between 16 and 24, find it hard to orgasm. They have pain during sexual intercourse, problems with erection and ejaculation. There's been an increase in sexual assaults, either rapes or different problems. The use of pornography is huge. 66.8% consume this sometimes. 68.4% male and 19.3% female in the last month has consumed pornography. And we can speak about addiction between 3 and 7% of the adolescents. However, we do see that this is still a taboo, that people do not speak about it. There are more scandals, more ideology, pornography, but we do not speak about this with scientific criteria. And there is an increase in sexually transmitted infections or diseases. What are the current risks? Well, one of the main ones is pornography, because it is a false source of sexual education. It is, of course, not a reliable source. It portrays relations without affection or without real consent. Just as a pure economic transaction, it distorts the view of sexuality and promotes stereotypes and unrealistic expectations. I had a patient who was truly concerned because, according to him, he had ejaculation But when we were exploring, he said that he wouldn't spend 2 hours like in a film, that he had relations. He was just married and he started to have intercourse with his wife. He had only watched pornography, and the only thing he could do was half an hour. And it was a condition. And I told him this should be less than 1 minute, not 30. So in the end, he was just laughing about it. And he said, now I understand how films are made. Maybe this person is resting, having a shower, and coming back another day and film again. It's probably scenes filmed at different points in time, but it generates distortion. And it generates consequences such as shame, guilt, sexual dissatisfaction, and also isolation, because it's not the same to see pixels on the screen than to be with a person, with a real person. So it's difficult to bond in a healthy way. Therefore, it is important to educate in a sexuality that is based on respect, on shared pleasure, and consent. And these are the foundations we have to lay during adolescence so that when they are adults, these foundations are well established. You can see, I spoke to you about the round table of sexuality. This would be very similar, but different. This would be the round table of pornography, where we can see there's a physical dimension, yes, desire, pleasure, amusement, but there is no emotional bonding, there is no intellectual or cognitive part because it doesn't contribute any cognitive aspects, no cultural references, and ethical spiritual is also not there. So it's just physical. What other risks and distortions can we find? Well, social media. Aesthetic pressure and objectification. If we find platforms like Instagram, TikTok, these reinforces unattainable beauty standards or very difficult or it is very difficult to keep them over time, these standards. So they generate constant comparison, insecurity, and low self-esteem, where they spend hours and hours trying to imitate or simulate what they see on the screen, objectification of one's own or others' bodies. And it reinforces the idea that the only important thing is your appearance. So we need to educate to develop a healthier relationship with our bodies and the images we consume. Any other risks or distortions? Well, there are poor affective models and lack of real and diverse models. Many adolescents do not have these healthy emotional role models at home or on the media. They do have easy access to pornography because they invest millions so that they can have a banner and they get hooked that way. If they have social medias, at some point there will be a lady dancing. This will lead you to a platform and this is just scaling up. However, sometimes they do not have family members that speak about this from a middle ground. It's not like you come sit here and let's speak about it and let us feel ashamed for days because of this conversation, or let's leave him or her learn on their own. It is like they are a boat and we are the lighthouse. As they grow up, the boat is larger and it goes further away. We need to stay as a lighthouse and shed light. And if they have any difficulty, they can come to us. This is why we are the light. There are some myths reinforced with this kind of models, such as romantic love, emotional dependence, jealousy as a sign of love. And, it's terrible to see adolescents watching soap operas. And then lack of examples of relations based on respect, empathy, and communication. Sometimes we see TV series not giving a good model, role model, and we as adults need to take a look at what they convey, because we, from a different experience, for us it's easier to distinguish, but for adolescents, they just keep that image as a model to be followed. So it's important to educate in diverse relationships where there is a real equality, where there is reciprocity, and where there is mutual respect.
Otro, si no el principal riesgo.
Another risk, maybe the main risk and distortion, is lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge in general, but also about consent and self-care. Many adolescents. Oh, sorry, it was in Spanish, I think, this slide. Yes, sorry. Many adolescents, when I send you the whole presentation, I will change this slide, sorry. Many adolescents do not know how to express their own boundaries or respect their boundaries or the others' boundaries. There's also a lack of education on emotional self-care, how to manage jealousy, how to work with group pressure, expectations, to know how to say no, to establish boundaries and limits, to have an assertive communication that is not just giving ground if I do not want to, or defend on a too aggressive manner. It is necessary to teach assertivity and communication skills that enable healthy relations with others and that they do not entail a burnout. If we do not defend what we do not want to do and we do not say no for fear, in the end, this will be like the others have rights, and we will feel bad about it. If we move to the other side of this scale, if we are aggressive, well, yes, we will be fine because we will be respected. But since we are aggressive, in the mid or long term, they will not want to count on us, so we will feel bad too. If we find a middle ground, assertivity, in the end, we will understand that we have our own opinions. Other people may have different opinions, and there will be an understanding saying, I do not want to do this, and it's okay. It's important to work on this misinformation and sexual myths to debunk wrong ideas on pleasure, understanding the pregnancy process, the risks for STIs, sexual transmitted infections, and understand that the first time is important and it's valuable, and so that we can work on all of this. I'm sorry, I don't know why it's in Spanish. I will change this into English before sending this to you. Really sorry for this. What kind of educational proposals will I make to you? Well, I think it's important to offer scientific, clear, and accessible information, promote critical thinking, as I said in the beginning, questioning myths, external pressures, and so that we can understand why things are that way. Promote respect and trust so that adolescents can express doubts, emotions, uncertainties, feelings, and so that there is a higher communication, a better communication. And it's super important to work on self-esteem and self-care, emotional self-care, because this will be the basis for a healthy sexuality. So this is it on my side. I would just like to leave some minutes just in case you have any doubt. And here you can see some references of the sources I used for my material. But again, if you have any doubts, I will answer as soon as possible. These are my contact details and my email, so that you can contact me. Are there any doubts? Perdona, ¿puedes mostrar de nuevo el correo? Can you please show your email address again? Cuando has dicho que de subir la presentación, ¿dónde la vamos a tener o cómo? Where are we going to receive the? But I think there will be a website, and it's no problem for me to upload this material. I will just update all the slides. But I don't know. I think there's a website, and this is where you will find the materials. Okay, thank you.
Tenemos un par de minutillos, no sé si alguien quiere.
Okay, I will just leave a couple of minutes in case somebody would like to ask a question, but I think we just did it very well with timing.
Pues parece que no.
Okay, it seems there are no questions. I have seen some messages saying thank you, and in the chat you can also see the website where these materials will be uploaded. So if it's okay, that's everything on my side.
Bueno, pues si os parece lo dejamos por aquí. Como tenéis el correo, si surge cualquier duda o lo que sea.
You have my email address in case you want to ask questions. I will try to answer as soon as possible. And I would like to finish by thanking you for this session. Thank you for your attention.
Cualquier duda, no dudéis en contactar.
And do not doubt to contact me. Have a lovely day.